just filled today. How it started. Yeah.
It's nice to know you can be a success after getting thrown out of college.
Several times.
For you guys at home, we're just waiting we have a few technical issues that we're just working through here real quick. All right, gonna introduce you guys. All right, so this morning it's my pleasure to introduce you guys to a couple of our Williston firefighters and paramedics, Anthony Simanskas and Prescott Nadeau. I think a lot of you guys already know these two. They've been in Williston for quite some time and serving our community. So Tony started out on the department in 2008 as a call staff member and then was hired on full-time in January of 2011. Tony is the department's EMS and paramedic coordinator, which oversees the emergency medicine operations of the department. Tony is a national registered paramedic and is also the clinical associate for the Vermont Technical College paramedicine program. Prescott has been with the fire department for over 15 years. So over 15 years. Could be 20, could be 25, over 15 years. Like Tony, he too started out as a call staff member and then was hired on full-time in 2010. Prescott was promoted to captain in 2021 and oversees the training division. Today, they're going to talk with us about an antidote to treat cyanide poisoning and about possibly the Rotary's consideration in helping with the purchase of something called a cyanide kit for the Williston-Richmond community. So with that, come on up.
Reaches works, but I think we'll be all right. Hey, I will send it. I can always walk back too.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Jerry, very much, not only for the invite, but also that awesome introduction. We smelled bacon and knew we were in the right place. So here we are. I have presented to you fine folks once before and have been equally as impressed the first time as I am now, to the point that I wish I lived. And I know I don't technically have to maybe, but either way, the Rotary, the Williston-Richmond Rotary has impressed me in many regards. And I'm not just trying to fluff you up for what we're about to present to. I'm just simply saying that even listening passively as I was trying to go through the technological hazard that exists every single time that laptop opens up, especially for presentations such as this, I was listening to and just remarking how awesome it is that this group gets together to push the needle on some of these items that are so very critically important, far beyond what we are presenting today and what I presented in the past. I'm just very impressed. And so I'm very pleased that Tony and I had the opportunity to, again, be in front of you, and would like to offer up the fire department does a lot more than I think folks see. You folks have invited me and a number of other members of the fire department in the past. If there's things that you need, we're coming to you with a potential need, a desire here. I'd like to offer that back and say, let's keep this conversation going in that's cyclical nature, so that we can actually have the two-way conversation as well. Something as simple as, it wouldn't necessarily be through the fire department, but as much as I joke, if there was, an off day that myself or another firefighter had, and you did need help moving a couch for somebody, it's all public service, whether we're wearing the badge or not, and we never are not firefighters. Yes.
Prescott, sorry.
Yes.
At the end of September, we're hosting a blood drive over at the Church of the Nazarene. We'll let you know the date.
Perfect.
And you can line people up.
Excellent.
Yeah. And those are, I'll tell you what, we know, without going down a crazy road here, we know the need for blood.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very much so. And so that is a huge, those little things, toss me the email. If we get 1, if we get 10, way more than that, it'd be awesome. But we'll see what we can do.
Going down a crazy road, talking about a blood drive, I'll just kind of think about that, right? Crazy road,
Yes. Yes, exactly. It's all interconnected. So let's talk about why this is interconnected, why we are here in front of you fine folks. Tony and I listened to this very nerdy podcast called the Grabs Podcast. And what literally just pictured the title is Grabs Podcast. What it's referring to is the rudimentary term for how firefighters rescue victims in a fire. We grab them literally at the very most rudimentary nature. We find them and it's dark and it's smoky. We can't see if we're grabbing a leg, an arm, a head, whatever it is. We find what we can. We grab them in the way that we have been trained to grab them, and we remove them from the building. The reason this podcast originated was because they were realizing that I can open up a textbook for firefighters and I can go to the search chapter and I can have somebody with some level of technical knowledge that really I'm not sure where that came from, but I'm trusting that that textbook is going to tell me everything I need to about how to grab, rescue a victim. What we realized is it's not as realistic as we had hoped. Firefighters from big cities, Detroit, FDNY, Fort Lauderdale, places like that, suddenly started coming forth and saying, man, this text is not accurate. The way they're teaching me how to grab the victim didn't work at all or could work better. They're refining it. So we listened to this podcast. We had the conversation just, hey, wow, I think, there's ways that we can improve upon our techniques internally, which we have done in the most recent recruit school that we had that just graduated in June with our 9 new firefighters. They had been taught some of those new grab techniques. The one piece that we haven't had a chance to address is this piece. In the Grabs podcast, they regularly were referring to the Cyanokit. Oh, so-and-so XYZ agency pulled the victim out, they administered the Cyanokit, and bam, all's well that ends well, the victim lived. So we're hearing this and saying, oh, that's just convenient. It's, okay, well, there's one podcast that had it work. Oh, there's another episode that had it work in the western part of the country. And then there's the southern part of the country that's used it, the Midwest that's used it, part of the Northeast that's used it. Oh, it was too coincidental to say, what is this thing, this magical thing, and do we in Vermont have it? I'm going to turn things over to Tony for a second. We'll actually give you the rundown of what is it. And then as we trickle on here, being very cognizant of your time, we'll just give you an idea of why it's very important to us.
All right, let's see if I can figure out how to go to the next slide here. If I can
You got it all.
finesse it here, maybe. Yes. There we go. What is it? Okay, so what the Cyanokit is, there's if you at the very beginning, you probably saw a very large word that is a bit mumbo jumbled, right? So hydroxycobalamin, that is the technical name of the medication, and Cyanokit is just the brand name. And what it does is, in the event of a fire or someone that has been removed from a fire or exposed to cyanide poisoning, which is a product of a fire, just because of all the off gases of all the materials that's within the structure, a cyanokit is the antidote for reversing the signs and symptoms of cyanide poisoning. So this kit has been around for quite a few years now, and it's been carried by EMS and fire agencies throughout the country to administer patients who've been exposed to cyanide poisoning. There's many signs and symptoms of cyanide poisoning, and what it does is it reverses the effects. Yeah, sure, yeah, please do. Continuing ed hours. Like I said, it converts the cyanide that's attached to the blood cells, allows oxygen to then release and bind to the cells and then excrete it through urination of the body. Signs and symptoms of this that we look for on the EMS side of things is soot around the mouth, whether they have been in a structure fire and with exposure to smoke and carcinogens, and also altered level mental status, seizure-like activity, stuff like that. So if any of these patients have been removed from a fire and they're showing us this, we need to get this medication on board to them. All right. Oop, wrong button. My apologies. Let's see if I can. There we go. Boom. All right. Again, like I said, exposure to fire, smoke in a closed area, more or less a structure fire, right? Soot around the nose, mouth, and ears, eyes, whatever. It's the staining of the smoke around the face. in that altered mental status, confusion, disorientation, loss of consciousness. They could be unconscious when we administer this for sure. So it's just a possibility.
One of the things that I'm not trying to chalk down at all. I want to just correct, because when I first joined the fire service, I had this realization early on in my career. It's not fire that kills people. It's smoke.
Yep.
And although that is not, never say never or never say always, right? There are awful circumstances in which that occurs, but the majority of the time it is truly the smoke and the hot gases, right? Hydrogen cyanide. We used to carry multi-gas meters on the trucks to pick up on the byproducts of combustion. What we realized was hydrogen cyanide was in some of our earlier meters not present. It wasn't there. When we finally got the gas meters that had hydrogen cyanide present, we began realizing that not only does smoke have the nasty carcinogens that give us a lot of worries about cancer if we don't wear a proper breathing apparatus, it also affects our civilian population early on. We don't need smoke banked from the ceiling all the way to the floor to have that civilian be in a dire need for this medication. We need a little bit of smoke for a sustained period of time. It's all about exposure. And so having this, any of these signs and symptoms, it could be a kitchen fire. We in the fire department learned early on that when somebody has a pot on the stove and burns food and there's a smoke condition, even if it's a light smoke condition, we're going on air. Some people would say, oh boy, they just like those breathing apparatus, like using that, right? The reality of it is that Teflon pan that was very briefly on fire created a little bit of smoke. What is Teflon? It's cancer in a pot. And this isn't a lecture about moving away from Teflon. What it is it's basically to say that when somebody has a kitchen fire that might extend a little bit into the cabinetry or paper towels that extends into a little bit of the countertop, anything on the countertop, that is a structural fire by definition. And for us, it means that there is distinct potential, whether the person is experiencing all of these or even just a few. It is evidence that we could potentially use this to save their life.
Yeah, and not only is it going to be used for a victim that's caught in a fire or exposed to cyanide, it could be the layperson who went into the house to try to remove someone that they thought were inside, and then got exposed and they became a patient themselves, and or us as firefighters, right? We could become trapped in the structure. It's a real possibility that this could happen. It happens every day around the country. Firefighters get trapped in a burning building. Well, at that point, you have a limited amount of air before it runs out. And then if they get you in time to remove you and you're still with it and you're still alive, you still have a pulse, we could have this capability to administer to remove those signs and symptoms of cyanide poisoning. So not only is it good for victims exposed, it's good for firefighters that have been exposed as well. Just a generic picture of what the kit entails. I think the next photo slide here kind of shows provider administering it. So this is a we in the medical field and as paramedics, we call it a dirty drip. So it's titrated through an infusion, through an IV. So the little catheter that we put into your arm for pain medicine, fluids, stuff like that, will start an IV on the patient or an IO, intraosseous administration, which is actually a needle that goes into the bone marrow. And we have the capabilities of doing this stuff. So we will hook it up through one of those ports and administer the medication through that over a 15-minute period. And then we can have the potential to redose if needed. So it hangs up in a little glass vial. It's kind of funky looking because it's actually red, which is wild. So it's totally different than anything that we usually see. Everything that we administer typically is clear. So it's kind of wild. So yeah, it's just dripped through an IV over 15 minutes and to the patient. So
now, why is 15 minutes important, right? Time is our enemy. Time in EMS is our enemy. Time in fire is our enemy, right? There's statistics out there that show that time without oxygen is directly proportional to survivability and cardiac arrest. Well, in the fire service, time is our enemy because fire grows at an exponential rate. The other thing that grows with fire, where there's smoke, there's fire. So we're going to see a lot of smoke. 15 minutes is incredibly important because we'll show one of the very tail end slides here, so I'll tie into it, but it's going to show our mutual aid districts around us, who we respond to for mutual aid for structural fires. And a lot of those agencies right here in this town at the very far reaches, we could be a little less than 15 minutes away in the town of Williston, but right next door, Richmond, Essex, Heinsberg, even, South Burlington to some degree, depending on where you are. 15 minutes is a very reasonable and realistic time frame for us to be on the scene transporting 20, 25, even 35 minutes, depending on where you are. Some of the places that we have responded to structural fires, it's been in excess of 35 minutes, which sounds a little crazy. But think about, let's just go our neighboring town of Richmond. This is the Williston and Richmond Rotary. So that is a very real possibility, especially with the new mutual aid agreement that has been recently agreed upon as it relates specifically to structural fire. So we go to Richmond for a structure fire. We pull somebody, we rescue somebody from that building, and then we have a transport time. We don't have this medication. We have a transport time in excess of 20, 25 minutes, let's say, to the hospital. Well, that 20, 25 minutes could absolutely be the difference between that person making it or not, simply because of the administration of this drug. That cyanide poisoning will work in conjunction with the other effects of smoke and carbon monoxide poisoning to not have a good outcome. And I'm just realizing this entire presentation is quite negative. I'm really happy we started with positive.
Is there any harm in administering this accidentally? Like, is it one of those
Great
things
question.
where it doesn't matter? If you suspect it, just do it? Is it that kind of thing?
Yeah, pretty much. It's mostly vitamin derivative, so there's no real harm in administering it accidentally, if you will. Which some medications that we have, it's the opposite, right? It's quite detrimental to their health if you administer it, but this one's pretty safe for the most part. So thankfully, though, if we do administer it, we have those tall tale signs and symptoms that we look for, and us as trained providers won't administer something unless we know we're going to be administering it, okay? So and that leads in, that's a good segue into this medication can only be administered by paramedics. So there's different levels of EMS providers. There's EMTs, advanced EMTs, paramedics, critical care paramedics. The Wilson Fire Department is certified up to the paramedic level. Each shift, we have 3 shifts that work 24 hours a day. Each shift has at least 2 paramedics on. We can drop down to at least 1. So there's always a paramedic here on shift with us, which is good. So this can only be given by a paramedic. As a paramedic working in Chittenden County, we have to sign on every morning to say we're available for paramedic intercepts. What that means is if a agency, let's say Shelburne, needs a paramedic, we could be called into Shelburne to provide paramedic level interventions because they do not have a paramedic on. So we have the capability to go to other communities to provide care to those patients where they wouldn't receive that care if there wasn't a paramedic on within the county. So we do that every day. It's part of our, if you will, protocol in the county to do that as a paramedic. So having this medication would afford us to provide it to other patients who may need it as well, which I think the next slide will transition into, this. Okay, so the University of Vermont Medical Center is a level 1 trauma center, the only one in the state of Vermont. It's the biggest hospital in the state of Vermont, and this hospital only has 3 available throughout the entire facility. So 3 Cyanokits. Which means if there is a large enough fire, they have to call for additional resources to come from other outlying hospitals. So if there is a structure fire with 4 patients who have been pulled from that unit and need cyanokits, only 3 of them are going to get it. 1 is not going to get it ASAP. They'll have to call it in from maybe Northwestern Hospital, Elizabethtown, Plattsburgh, where have you. That's a 30-minute, couple-hour delay in receiving that medication where they'll probably expire before that. So
Didn't your earlier slide say that some people will need 2 doses?
potentially
Does that require 2 tips?
it will. Yep.
Or
Not more.
That's the other part. So
I like where this is going.
So this kit is fairly costly. I've researched different areas and distributors for the purchase of this kit. The highest one I found was $1,700. The cheapest was actually through the hospital, which we do buy a majority of our medications through, just because we get a better price through them, and it's a little over $800 for this medication. So.
Now, not to go down the political route real quick, but I'm just gonna for a hot second mention the fact that that cost is directly relational to the drug companies that one day woke up and said, this is a vitamin derivative being sold for $100 or something ridiculously cheap like that. Man, oh man, but this is a critical vitamin derivative that fire departments could probably use to help save people's life, right? Much like diabetic medications that we've heard about in the news recently. I'm gonna stop here, but all I'm gonna say is the drug companies are the reason that drug costs this much money.
Yeah, so the shelf life on this
man,
medication is about 3 years. So every 3 years it will need to be discarded, and a new one will have to be put into service in the event we do not use it. I've done some research as well, and I'm pretty sure if the Williston Fire Department does carry this, we'll be the first department in the state of Vermont to carry it on a licensed EMS vehicle, which is pretty neat. Sure.
Is there any knowledge on how frequently the hospital goes through their cyanokit?
Yeah, so over the last few, so not frequently, thankfully, not like some of the medications that we give and that they do in the hospital, but over the last, I think it was 3 years, they've given 3 kits. So again, infrequent, but frequent enough to be like, hey, this medication should be more accessible, especially nowadays with everything that's going on. You know, we see fires happening more and more frequently, maybe not in Williston per se, but we do see fires in Williston. And when we do see fires, it's a fire, and we had the potential for victims. In 2015, we had a victim off the South Road who bailed from his house fire. He ended up having to be intubated due to the injuries sustained from the smoke and inhalation, and he would have been a recipient for this kit. I think that actually might be in the next slide here, some of our contacts. Yeah.
So that begs the question, if UVM Medical Center has only used 3 in 3 years,
Mhm.
how many people have died before they could get a Cyanokit?
Right,
Cal,
and
you
that's
nailed
that's the question, right? That's the long question that.
The second question is, Mike, is how many?
This is,
Yeah.
that's why I love this group.
Yep. And
The
a
questions
great,
are very stimulating.
great question. So it's hard to tell because until we actually have it in our hands to administer, we have new medications and new tools every year that come to our hands so that we can use. As of recent, it's a tool, not a medication, is telehealth, right? We can communicate via a FaceTime app essentially with doctors at the hospital. We're a pilot site for this program, and prior to it, only 2 other agencies in the county have been using it. They've used it maybe once or twice through the duration of the time it's been in service. The first week when we went online with it, we used that, I think, a half dozen times. So
Now,
it's all how you are exposed, your training on it, and comfortability of using it. And with us being in a central location in Chittenden County, essentially, and us having the capability of going to outlying agencies for paramedic level interventions for victims exposed to a fire, we could see definitely using this kit. I don't know how frequently, but we could use it for sure.
so numerically, the answer is we can't pinpoint that numerically. What we can do, and this slide illustrates my point briefly earlier, our aim is to obviously use this kit for the Williston and Richmond communities, especially if any level of funding were to be administered from you folks. However, the reality of it is, in speaking with an attending physician at the UVM Medical Center, Doug George, he's indicated that there is an interest level at the hospital level to have dissemination of this Cyanokit in the communities. What it takes is that first step, the awkward first step to say $800 is not cheap. there is no definitive way to say 1 or 10 times a year that it will be used, right? So the check marks against this kit being brought to the community are adding up. However, what I think what our aim, our hope is to be the pioneer community between Williston and Richmond to say, we have the kits. Sally, your question was very well timed in so much as how many folks have died because of a lack of use, because of a 25+ minute response time in which it wasn't even considered. If suddenly the Williston Fire Department, and don't, for those of you that may or have seen me on the news, I would be not shy to introduce this to the media and announce very, very loud and proud that we have this, not just to say Williston and Richmond communities have access to this, but to say, you know, let's get the word out. Let's talk to our mutual aid partners to let them know that we have it and that they can use it as well. 1, 2, 3. Actually, I'm so sorry. You were first. Thank you, sir. For
My question is too, that like the vaccines and the testing kits that we get now have a couple of them in each box.
Yep.
Is it possible for this kind of kit, if it's starting to be used, to actually have several in each kit rather than $800 for one person for one time?
Right. And I think I think right. I think exactly. And that's the beast, right? That's the beast to deal with that. With the Cyanokit being the brand name of it, they have the monopoly on that medication, right? So they get to choose what they do and don't do with it. And for them, it's just all the monetary value, right? I can get $800 for one kit or $1,700 for one kit. People are going to buy it. If I put three administrations in one kit, well, I'm losing money.
Well,
So.
the question we have too is that we have so many wildfires now.
Mm.
We've got firefighters
Yep.
that are being exposed.
Oh, for sure.
And then we've got people who are stubbornly thinking they'll put the hose on their house and it won't burn.
Yep.
So, I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands of people that can be affected by that. And I would assume, does that also work on that kind of fire? The effects of that kind of fire?
Less so, only because now smoke is smoke to some degree, but it is a derivative of what is burning, right?
Right.
So if
Which
we call it a
anything
class A
can
material,
happen.
well, that's it, right? So the brush catches on fire outdoors, and it is it would literally be no different than if we were to start a little bit of like a fire in your backyard on an evening, right? It's a class A material, very healthy to a very slight degree, right? Let's roast some marshmallows, get rid of some brush, that kind of thing. The difference is then that brush fire catches onto the house and it becomes a much more aggressive smoke. Where the carcinogen is, where hydrogen cyanide lives, carbon monoxide. So instantaneously your brush fire suddenly became a structural fire, and this became instantly relevant.
Yeah.
So, is this a compensable cost? Like if you give somebody a ride in an ambulance, I think they might get a bill or their insurance company. If you
Correct.
administer this drug, would it get billed to an insurance? If the person had insurance, does it come back to you so that it's a one-time cost?
Yeah.
Theoretically?
Essentially,
If you
yeah.
have one kit?
Yep. So if we transport that patient,
Yep.
we will
administer it.
we build their insurance.
And then theoretically, it comes to Williston.
Yes.
And then you could
The
theoretically.
It's
find
essentially-
pays for it.
Well, yeah, exactly. So,
Okay.
I think my question's as much of a statement as a question, but when there's a structure fire, there can very well be more than one person in that house that needs to.
yeah, and actually, good segue, Sherry, into this one, right? Story time. We mentioned about the Grab podcast. We've had quite a few incidences over the last, I would say, 5-6 years, even 7, where we could have used this kit. One I mentioned about the South Road fire, where the gentleman bailed from his home and was exposed to cyanide. The products are carcinogen from the fire. Bolton, this was a call I went on 2 years ago. A gentleman, this was in Bolton, we get called as a paramedic intercept. He had 50% burns throughout his body. And we there's other issues where we can't do certain things in the county just because of scope of practice with our hospital and district that we fall in. But he would have been a patient who would have had this kit administered to him just with his exposure. Milton, we had another paramedic intercept for a patient from a house fire in Milton just, I think, a month ago. Another possibility that thankfully they didn't need it, but it was this would have been a huge strain on the hospital, was Shelburne 3 weeks ago at that house fire where 2 kids and 2 adults had to bail from the second floor window. Thankfully, they were not burned. They were not exposed to the ideal H atmosphere, but it could have been a possibility if they were trapped any longer, right? And that's 4 patients. That would strain the hospital immensely on their level of capabilities. So 1 kit, we wouldn't probably have made a difference with 4 of them, but we could have prioritized, right? Take the most sick person, give them that kit, and then get the other 3 up to the hospital. So
What you don't see up here are what I was alluding to earlier with the kitchen fire, the trash can fire, the microwave fire. A lot of these small fires, thanks to this community, the town of Williston, the residents of this town, right? We have a career fire department. It's a combination fire department, but we career staffing. Our minimum staffing right this minute, as I stand in front of you, is 5 people. All right. So we don't have 5 people on right now. We have more than enough right now. But if people were out sick or on vacation and Murphy's Law came into play, we'd have 5 people minimum, which means the kitchen fire, the pot that was left on the stove, unattended for any number of reasons that then began to extend into the cabinetry, would often be stopped there because our response time is often less than 5 minutes. Our outreaching extended response time is less than 8 minutes. The very furthest reaches of the town, if we are on the furthest reach of town, is approximately 10 minutes, right? So 10 minutes is still an exponential fire growth. However, that small kitchen fire doesn't come onto this, isn't often placed into the data because it remains small. It was stopped at a pot on the stove. It was stopped before it got into the cabinetry and started, creating much more of a smoke condition. However, as I was saying, those fires, if you had somebody, again, carelessly discarded smoking material outside a home or inside a home onto a couch, that burnt food where somebody is passed out, whether it be a medical condition or otherwise, all of that comes into play. Where if we see those signs and symptoms earlier, this kit would be administered. It hasn't been on our brains. Well, Tony's in mine. Yes, it has. But other folks on our department, other folks on Richmond, other folks on Heinsberg, it hasn't been on their mind because it hasn't been available.
So, and to go along with Gavin said, the small little fires for us in Williston, we have huge exposure to the senior population in town, right? Think how many of these senior apartment buildings there are in town, and we've been there quite a few times for small little fires that never make it to the WCX news, but we've had to extinguish them. There's been some where we have had to transport these patients due to smoke inhalation, thankfully not large amount of cyanide poisoning exposure, but still the risk and the potential is there, right? There are low frequency calls, but it's a high risk for us.
So we'll have one more question.
Oh,
Dave.
yeah.
So there are 4 at the hospital,
There are 3.
3, and they stay at the hospital?
Correct.
So every fire department should have one of these, right?
I think ideally that'd be great. If all the cards aligns, there have been talks in the coming years. So we've been talking with Dr. George, the physician at the hospital, who's also one of the district medical advisors for our county here. The hospital has a critical care transport service, HealthNet, and they also have extended out to in the future to provide medical response to scenes where they could potentially run a kit or 2 to the scene to administer additional doses if needed. Again, that's a a work in progress. And it has been for years now. And hopefully in the coming years, it'll come to fruition. But right now, there's no capability to have those kits respond to the scene from the hospital. They're strictly at the hospital.
You know, $700 seems like a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money when you consider what
What it could do.
Sure.
Yeah, you know, and the fact that they last 3 years and the fact that you might get reimbursed by an insurance company or somebody, that might make sense for everybody.
Yeah, right. I know. And, you know, it's hard to play the what if game, right? Because everything's a what if. What if, you know, tomorrow we don't wake up? It's a possibility. But at the same time, this is a tool in our toolbox. We love to have tools. We love tools, right? Especially when they're really shiny and fancy. But this will add to another tool to our toolbox to provide this treatment and the service to our community and not only community as well. Because you know, if someone needs it in Richmond and they're calling for our help, we need to go help them, right? It doesn't matter if they're Richmond and this unit was purchased for Williston. And that's my perspective, right? Because I would want someone to give this medicine to me if I was exposed and I needed it, regardless of where it's coming from. So if we have the capability, why not share that with the rest of the communities around us too?
Right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
So much. Our board's going to discuss whether to help fund one of these
No
kits.
problem.
And if anybody in the club has thoughts they'd like to share with the board about this, please email me. We'll be meeting in a couple of weeks and we want to hear from you if you think this is a good idea.
And reach out to the fire department as well if you have any questions.
And by the way, if you know any old ladies living in the senior communities, tell them not to put their cookbooks in the oven and forget it when they turn the oven on.
Right. Oh my goodness.
You do get to do it.
Yeah, and I'm gonna start cooking my eggs in cast iron fry pan. So to get rid of that Teflon. So as a token of our appreciation, you guys, we're gonna make a donation in honor of the Williston Fire Department in your names to the Williston Central School Program for the Connecting Youth Mentoring Program. Okay, all right.
Thank you for everyone for having us.
Thank you guys for coming over. And I'll-
Can I just pick one? You know, don't let the fact that you don't live in Williston keep you from joining Rotary. I've been in Rotary for over 20 years. I've never lived in Williston. I live now over an hour away and I'm still a member.
Yeah.
Just
So
saying.
you could also have a group membership. So one guy could come, different people could come different weeks. Yeah. Yeah. Think about it. And now our sergeant at arms gets to do his bit. Get out your wallet.
Yeah, I'll start with my wallet first, but first of all, I'm gonna throw in $1 in anticipation of forgetting to wear my Rotary pin.